In the shadow of 20th century history lurks an organization whose influence extends far beyond the common understanding of power. The Ordo Templi Orientis, or O.T.O., emerged as a secret society but transformed into something much greater under the leadership of a man whom some considered a prophet, others a charlatan. Aleister Crowley, the self-proclaimed Great Beast 666, created a system of beliefs that penetrated the very heart of modern culture. His teachings on power through will and sexual energy found an unexpected resonance in the highest echelons of society. From London salons to Hollywood studios, from the rock scene to political offices, the invisible threads of Crowley's influence entangled Western civilization. His Book of the Law became the secret Bible of the counterculture, and the symbols and rituals of the O.T.O. seeped into mass consciousness through music, cinema, and art. How did an ordinary man manage to create a doctrine that changed the worldview of entire generations? What lies behind the veil of secrecy of the Ordo Templi Orientis? And what price did society pay for this occult revolution? The history of the Ordo Templi Orientis began at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries in Europe, swept by a wave of occult revival. In 1904, the German occultist and Freemason Theodor Reuss officially registered an organization whose full name was Ordo Templi Orientis, Order of the Eastern Temple. Reuss, who had connections in European esoteric circles, created a system that united various mystical traditions, from Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism to Eastern Tantric practices. Initially, the O.T.O. was conceived as an alternative to traditional Freemasonry, an organization where seekers of secret knowledge, not limited by the strict frameworks of classical lodges, could gather. Reuss structured the order according to the model of Masonic systems, with 9 degrees of initiation, each of which opened new esoteric mysteries to the adept. Special attention was paid to Eastern Tantric practices, which Reuss adapted for Western thinking. It was this aspect of the teaching that would later become decisive for the entire philosophy of the order. A turning point in the history of the organization was Reuss's meeting with the British occultist Aleister Crowley in 1910. Legend has it that Reuss accused Crowley of disclosing the highest secrets of the order concerning sexual magic in one of his published works. A surprised Crowley, who allegedly independently came to similar practices, became interested in the organization. Soon he was admitted to the ranks of the O.T.O. and quickly advanced up the hierarchical ladder. By 1912, Crowley headed the British branch of the order, and in 1922, after Reuss's death, he actually became the international leader of the organization. With Crowley's arrival, the order underwent fundamental changes. If Reuss saw the O.T.O. primarily as a Masonic organization with elements of tantric practices, Crowley completely reoriented it to his teaching, Thelema. He rewrote the rituals, introduced the principles of his Book of the Law, and transformed sexual magic from one of the elements of practice into the central component of the highest degrees of initiation. Under Crowley's leadership, the Ordo Templi Orientis transformed from a relatively little-known esoteric society into a powerful tool for spreading a new occult paradigm. Crowley brought into the organization his charismatic leadership style, literary talent, and scandalous reputation, which attracted the attention of the intellectual elite of Europe and America to the order. Edward Alexander Crowley was born on October 12, 1875, in Warwickshire, England. His birth into the family of a wealthy brewer and a devout follower of the Plymouth Brethren, a Christian fundamentalist sect, laid the groundwork for a future conflict. His mother called little Edward the Beast, referencing biblical prophecies, unaware that he would one day proudly embrace this name. Crowley's childhood was spent in an atmosphere of religious fanaticism and strictness. Daily Bible readings and constant reminders of the sinfulness of human nature instilled in young Edward a deep aversion to Christianity. When his father died in 1887, the 12-year-old boy experienced his first serious spiritual crisis. Crowley received his education at prestigious institutions, first at Malvern College, then Tunbridge School, and finally Trinity College, Cambridge University. It was at the university that he was introduced to occultism. Crowley devoured mystical literature, studied alchemy and Kabbalah, and in 1898 joined the occult order, the Golden Dawn. During this period, Crowley abandoned the name Edward and adopted the name Aleister, which would accompany him for the rest of his life. He actively experimented with drugs, sexual practices, and magical rituals, forming his unique system of beliefs. A turning point came in 1904, when during his honeymoon in Cairo, Crowley received a revelation from an entity named Aiwass. For 3 consecutive days from noon to 1 o'clock, he transcribed a text that he would later call the Book of the Law, the fundamental work of his teaching. In the following years, Crowley traveled the world, conquered mountain peaks, and explored Eastern spiritual practices. He created his own religious and philosophical system, Thelema, whose central tenet became the principle, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." By the time he met Theodore Roos in 1910, Crowley already had a reputation as a scandalous magician and poet. The British press called him the wickedest man in the world after the publication of his erotic poetry and accounts of magical experiments. In April 1904, an event occurred in Cairo that forever changed Western occultism. Aleister Crowley, while on his honeymoon with his first wife Rose, received a mystical revelation. According to his testimony, for 3 consecutive days, from noon to 1 p.m., a supernatural being named Aiwass dictated to him a text that would later become known as the Book of the Law, or Liber al vel Legis. This small text, consisting of 3 chapters, became the cornerstone of a new religious and philosophical system, Thelema. It proclaimed the advent of a new era, the Aeon of Horus, succeeding the previous eons of Isis and Osiris. While the former eras were characterized by the worship of the maternal principle and the cult of the suffering god, the new era proclaimed the triumph of individual will and power. The central principle of the Book of the Law is expressed in the famous phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." However, Crowley emphasized that this was not a call to primitive hedonism. Do what thou wilt meant following one's true will, the deep purpose of each individual, which they must discover within themselves through spiritual practices. The second key tenet was the phrase, "Love is the law, love under will." This formula balanced the individualism of the first principle, pointing to the necessity of harmony between personal will and cosmic forces. Initially, Crowley himself was skeptical of the received text. He even lost the manuscript and only rediscovered it 5 years later. It was not until 1909 that he fully comprehended the significance of the Book of the Law and made it the foundation of his teaching. The text contains frightening passages glorifying war and destruction, which allowed critics to accuse Crowley of preaching violence. However, followers of Thelema interpret these passages symbolically, as a description of humanity's inner struggle with its limitations. The Book of the Law is written in complex, poetic language, filled with ambiguous symbols and riddles. Crowley himself spent decades interpreting it, creating extensive commentaries. He claimed that the text contained ciphers and numerical codes that revealed the deep mysteries of the universe. At the very heart of the Order of the Eastern Temple's teachings lies a concept that has remained a secret for centuries, accessible only to selected initiates. Sexual magic is not merely an esoteric practice, but the cornerstone of Crowley's system, its most guarded secret. To understand this phenomenon, one must discard ordinary notions of sexuality as a simple physiological act. In Crowley's interpretation, sexual energy represents the most powerful creative force of the universe, a primal energy capable of transforming reality. This concept has ancient roots, traceable in the tantric practices of India and Tibet, the alchemical treatises of the West, and the Gnostic teachings of early Christianity. Crowley synthesized these traditions, creating a unique system adapted for the Western consciousness of the 20th century. In the higher degrees of the O.T.O, adepts were initiated into the secret of using sexual energy as a tool to achieve altered states of consciousness and manifest their will in the material world. The central idea of these practices was that the moment of sexual culmination creates a special state of consciousness in which the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds is erased. At this point, the magician's consciousness becomes extremely susceptible to suggestion, and his will, incredibly powerful. Crowley developed a complex system of rituals where the sexual act became a sacred rite aimed at achieving specific magical goals. These practices ranged from relatively simple forms to extremely complex ceremonies, including elements of Western ritual magical art. For Crowley, sexual magic was not just a way to achieve ecstatic states, but a practical tool for transforming reality. In his diaries, he described numerous experiments aimed at materializing desired objects, attracting financial well-being, establishing contact with spiritual entities, and even influencing political events. Special attention was paid to the practice Crowley called ninth-degree magic, the order's most secret technique. According to his teaching, this practice allowed for the creation of magical children, not physical offspring, but energetic entities capable of fulfilling the magician's will on the astral and material planes. The system of initiations of the Ordo Templi Orientis represents a meticulously crafted hierarchical structure, modeled after Masonic orders, but filled with the unique content of Thelemic teachings. When Aleister Crowley took over the O.T.O, he reorganized the existing system, expanding it to 10 main and 3 secret degrees. Each step of this ladder of initiations not only conferred a new status, but also opened up a certain level of esoteric knowledge and practices to the adept. The neophyte's path began with the 0 degree, Minerval, symbolizing entry into the antechamber of the temple. Here, the initiate became acquainted with the basic principles of Thelema and swore an oath to keep the secrets of the order. The first 3 degrees, man and brother, magician and master magician, corresponded to traditional Masonic degrees and served as a foundation for further advancement. At these levels, the adept studied symbolic systems, the history of esoteric traditions, and the basics of ritual work. The 4th degree, perfect magician and companion of the Holy Royal Arch of Enoch, marked the transition to deeper mysteries. Here, for the first time, the veil was lifted over sexual magical practices, albeit in a symbolic form. From the 5th to the 7th degrees, the adept underwent initiation into the so-called sovereign sanctuary of the Gnosis, where the alchemical aspects of the great work, the transmutation of an ordinary human into a magical being, were studied. Of particular importance was the 8th degree, perfect pontiff of the Illuminati. At this level, autoerotic magical practice was revealed as a tool for spiritual development. The 9th degree, perfect illuminatus, was considered the heart of the entire O.T.O system. It was here that the main secret of the order was imparted to the initiate, the technique of heterosexual magic aimed at achieving specific magical goals. Crowley considered this practice to be the most powerful tool for manifesting will in the material world. Thelema, a philosophical system created by Aleister Crowley, represents a revolutionary approach to understanding human nature and power. Unlike traditional religious teachings based on submission to external authority, Thelema proclaims the highest value to be the unfolding and realization of the individual's will. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This formula is often mistakenly interpreted as a call to anarchy and permissiveness. However, Crowley invested a much deeper meaning in it. True will, in the understanding of Thelema, is not momentary desires or whims, but the deep essence of a person, their true destiny. Discovering this true will becomes the primary task of every Thelemite. Crowley developed a whole complex of practices for this purpose, including meditations, ritual magic, and work with the subconscious. Thelemic ethics radically differ from Christian morality. If Christianity speaks of humility and self-sacrifice, Thelema glorifies strength, self-realization, and power over one's own destiny. Every person, according to Crowley, is a star in the boundless cosmos, moving along their unique orbit. When stars collide, conflicts arise. Therefore, the most important principle of Thelemic ethics is non-interference in the will of others. Every man and every woman is a star, states another fundamental principle of the teaching. This formula asserts the absolute equality of people before cosmic law, regardless of gender, race, or social status. Power, in the understanding of Thelema, is primarily power over oneself. Only by overcoming one's internal limitations, fears, and prejudices can a person acquire true strength. To achieve this goal, Crowley proposed a methodology he called Yoga of the West, a synthesis of Eastern spiritual practices and Western magical art. A special place in this system was occupied by the concept of the holy guardian angel, the highest aspect of the human soul, contact with whom revealed to the adept their true will. Thelema asserts a new understanding of freedom, not as an absence of restrictions, but as a conscious following of one's true path. In this sense, Thelemic philosophy anticipated many ideas of 20th century existentialism and humanistic psychology. In 1920, Aleister Crowley arrived in Sicily with a new goal: to create a living laboratory for his teachings. In the fishing village of Cefalù, he rented an old farmhouse, which he named the Abbey of Thelema. On the walls of this modest dwelling, vibrant frescoes depicting erotic and magical scenes soon appeared, created by Crowley himself and his followers. Above the entrance, the inscription, "Do what thou wilt," the main principle of Thelemic philosophy, proudly proclaimed. The abbey became the first attempt to create a society living according to the laws of the new Aeon of Horus. A motley group of disciples gathered here: artists, poets, seekers of spiritual enlightenment, and simply adventurers drawn by the scandalous fame of the great beast. Daily life in the commune revolved around magical rituals, meditations, and the study of occult sciences. Crowley developed a strict routine that included yogic practices at dawn, intellectual pursuits during the day, and magical ceremonies in the evening. However, it was experiments with altered states of consciousness that defined the abbey's scandalous reputation. Crowley actively used psychoactive substances as a tool for spiritual development. He believed that narcotic experiences could lift the veil between worlds and facilitate contact with higher powers. Rituals of sexual magic were also openly practiced, shocking the conservative inhabitants of Sicily. Locals regarded the strange commune of foreigners with suspicion. Rumors of black magic, orgies, and satanic rites quickly spread throughout the area. The situation reached a critical point when a tragedy occurred at the abbey. The young poet, Raoul Loveday, died. Although the cause of death was an illness caused by drinking water from a local stream, Italian newspapers accused Crowley of performing a deadly ritual. The scandal attracted the attention of Benito Mussolini, who had recently come to power in Italy. The fascist regime, seeking an alliance with the Catholic Church, could not tolerate the presence of a satanic commune on Italian soil. In April 1923, Crowley received a 24-hour notice to leave the country. Thus ended the 3-year experiment to create a Thelemic commune. Despite its brief existence, the Abbey of Thelema left a deep mark on occult history. Many practices were tested here that later became part of the counterculture of the 60s. The frescoes created by Crowley have survived to this day and are considered important examples of 20th-century occult art. Behind the scenes of early 20th-century global politics and finance, Aleister Crowley wove an astonishingly extensive web of contacts. The man whom the press dubbed the wickedest in the world paradoxically found himself a welcome guest in the salons of high society and the exclusive clubs of the powerful. His charisma, intellect, and reputation as a master of occult sciences attracted those who sought unconventional paths to power and influence. Among Crowley's followers and interlocutors were representatives of Europe's most ancient aristocratic families. Dukes and counts, whose family histories spanned centuries, secretly attended his lectures and rituals. His influence was particularly strong on the German aristocracy, where interest in occultism traditionally combined with political ambitions. His relationship with British intelligence is noteworthy. There is documentary evidence that during the First World War, Crowley collaborated with British naval intelligence. Living in New York, he published articles in pro-German publications that painted Britain in an unflattering light in order to gain the trust of German agents. This double game allowed him to penetrate circles close to the German government and collect valuable intelligence. His handler was William Wiseman himself, the head of British intelligence in North America. No less significant were Crowley's connections with the financial elite. In the United States, his teachings resonated with industrialists and bankers seeking spiritual alternatives to traditional Christianity. Some of America's wealthiest individuals secretly financed the publication of his books and the organization of lecture tours. A special place in this network was occupied by cultural and art figures. Crowley was friends with writers Aldous Huxley and William Butler Yeats, and artists Auguste Rodin and Austin Spare. Through these people, his ideas permeated intellectual circles and were transformed into artistic images accessible to the general public. His relationship with Gerald Gardner, the founder of the modern Wiccan movement, is illustrative. Gardner was initiated into the Ordo Templi Orientis and adapted many of Crowley's ideas for his neo-pagan religion, which subsequently gained millions of followers worldwide. Many of these connections remained hidden from the public. Crowley's influential followers preferred not to publicize their interest in his teachings, fearing reputational risks. It was this secrecy that gave rise to numerous conspiracy theories about a secret government of Thelemites, supposedly manipulating world events. With the death of Aleister Crowley in December 1947, the Ordo Templi Orientis found itself on the brink of extinction. the last years of the great beast's life were overshadowed by illness, poverty, and drug addiction. Dying in a modest boarding house in Hastings, he left no clear instructions regarding the succession of power in the organization, which led to an immediate struggle for his legacy. Karl Germer, Crowley's closest associate, who received a written appointment from him as his successor, headed the American branch of the O.T.O. However, his vision for the future of the order differed dramatically from Crowley's. Germer, a man of ascetic disposition, believed that the teaching of Thelema should be disseminated through the publication of Crowley's books, rather than through the active initiation of new members. Under his leadership, the organization virtually ceased initiations, turning into a publishing enterprise. At the same time, in Great Britain, Kenneth Grant, one of Crowley's last students, declared himself the head of the British branch. Grant developed his own interpretation of Crowley's teachings, emphasizing the connection of Thelema with extraterrestrial entities and ancient cults. His approach, known as the Typhonian tradition, met with sharp disapproval from Germer, who officially expelled Grant from the order in 1955. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, Friedrich Mellinger, known by the magical name Frater Saturnus, created his own version of the O.T.O, oriented towards German-speaking followers. His organization, Fraternitas Saturni, retained many of Crowley's rituals, but interpreted them through the prism of German esoteric tradition. By the early 1960s, it seemed that the O.T.O was doomed to a slow demise. However, it was then that an unexpected revival occurred. Grady Lewis McMurtry, a World War II veteran who had received documents from Crowley granting him the right to reorganize the order in case of a crisis, intensified his activities. After Germer's death in 1962, McMurtry, known by the magical name Hymenaeus Alpha, began to restore the organizational structure of the O.T.O in California. The time for the order's revival proved ideal. The counterculture of the 1960s, with its interest in Eastern religions, psychedelic experiences, and sexual freedom, created fertile ground for the spread of Crowley's ideas. Youth, rejecting traditional values, found resonance with their aspirations in Thelemic philosophy. In 1969, McMurtry officially registered the O.T.O as a religious organization in California. A period of active growth began. New lodges opened, previously unavailable texts by Crowley were published, and educational programs for new members were developed. The musical world of the second half of the 20th century became an unexpected platform for the spread of Aleister Crowley's ideas. What began as a secret teaching for the chosen few suddenly burst into the arena of mass culture, thanks to rock stars who became engrossed in occultism. The pioneer of this strange union of music and magic was Jimmy Page, a virtuoso guitarist and founder of the legendary band Led Zeppelin. His fascination with Crowley's works began in the 60s, when he started collecting rare books and manuscripts of the Great Beast. The passion grew into an obsession. In the 70s, Page acquired Crowley's former residence, the famous Boleskine House, on the shore of Scotland's Loch Ness. In this gloomy mansion, Crowley once performed the complex Abramelin ritual, intended to establish contact with the holy guardian angel. The influence of Thelemic philosophy was reflected in Led Zeppelin's symbolism. On the inner sleeve of the album, 4 symbols representing the band members resemble magical sigils from Crowley's grimoires. And the famous phrase, "Do what thou wilt," was engraved on the band's first vinyl records. Parallel to Page, another follower of Crowley, David Bowie, was conquering the world of rock music. In the song Quicksand, he openly mentions the Golden Dawn and Crowley himself. The period of creating the album Station to Station was marked by Bowie's deep immersion in occult practices. His stage persona, the Thin White Duke, was directly linked to the thelemic concept of achieving knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. The 80s brought a new wave of Crowleyan influence with the emergence of Ozzy Osbourne and his hit, Mr. Crowley. The song, beginning with ominous church organ sounds, posed a direct question. "Mr. Crowley, what was going on in your head?" The album featuring this composition sold millions of copies, introducing the name of the British magician to a whole generation of metalheads. The 90s were marked by the appearance of another iconic figure, Marilyn Manson, who not only used Crowley's aesthetics, but also became a member of the Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey, a great admirer of thelemic philosophy. Manson combined shocking theatricality with a deep understanding of occult symbolism, creating a unique blend that attracted millions of fans. The symbolism of thelema, pentagrams, Ouroboros, Egyptian iconography became an integral part of rock culture's visual aesthetic. The principle, "do what thou wilt," itself perfectly resonated with the rebellious spirit of rock music, its striving for freedom from conventions and restrictions. Through music, ideas once accessible only to a narrow circle of initiates penetrated mass consciousness, shaping the worldview of millions of young people around the world. The connection between occultism and cinema emerged at the dawn of filmmaking, when Aleister Crowley himself showed an interest in this new medium. In the 1910s, he experimented with creating short films, seeing in moving images an ideal tool for conveying visionary experiences and magical states of consciousness. Evidence of his work on the film The Eleusinian Mysteries Ritual has survived, where he attempted to recreate ancient Greek rites using primitive yet innovative special effects for that time. In the 1940s, the influence of thelemic philosophy on Hollywood intensified, thanks to Jack Parsons, a brilliant rocket engineer and simultaneously the head of the Californian O.T.O. Lodge. Parsons, while working on developing rocket fuel for military projects, simultaneously hosted occult gatherings at his mansion in Pasadena. These meetings were attended by many figures from the film industry, including screenwriters and directors from leading studios. The 1950s were marked by the appearance of films where thelemic symbolism subtly penetrated the screen. Classic film noirs of that period often included elements echoing Crowley's aesthetic and philosophy. The theme of human duality, the search for true will, and resistance to societal constraints. A real breakthrough occurred in the 1960s and 70s with the emergence of directors like Kenneth Anger, an open follower of thelema's teachings. His experimental films Scorpio Rising and Lucifer Rising became manifestos of occult cinema, directly utilizing the symbolism and rituals of the O.T.O. Notably, the soundtrack for Lucifer Rising was composed by Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, another admirer of Crowley. In mainstream cinema, thelemic ideas penetrated more subtly. Roman Polanski's film Rosemary's Baby, although not directly linked to the O.T.O., reflected societal paranoia regarding secret occult societies. Interestingly, Polanski was familiar with Crowley's concepts through his friend Kenneth Anger. The 1980s and 90s brought a new wave of interest in occultism to Hollywood. Directors like David Lynch incorporated elements resonating with thelemic cosmology into their works. Twin Peaks, with its concept of the black and white lodges, and Mulholland Drive, with its theme of duality, all echoed the dualistic nature of Crowley's teachings. In modern Hollywood, the influence of the O.T.O. has become even more diffused but pervasive. From superhero blockbusters, where the theme of acquiring superhuman will often appears, to independent films exploring the boundaries of consciousness, Thelemic concepts continue to shape cinematic language. In the world of modern politics, the influence of occult organizations remains one of the most controversial topics. Theories about the secret influence of Aleister Crowley's followers on the governments of world powers multiply each year, giving rise to a bizarre mixture of facts and fiction. How real is the political influence of O.T.O. today? To answer this question, it is necessary to separate documented facts from conspiratorial speculation. Undoubtedly, in the 20th century, some political figures showed interest in Crowley's teachings. Thus, archives preserve evidence of contacts between members of O.T.O. and intelligence agencies of both Great Britain and the USA. Crowley himself collaborated with British intelligence during the First World War, which is confirmed by declassified documents. However, claims about the existence of some secret network of Thelemites controlling governments have no documentary confirmation. In the 90s, a theory spread that high-ranking members of President Bush Sr.'s administration secretly practiced rituals based on Crowley's teachings. These rumors were supported by photographs in which some politicians allegedly used gestures resembling Thelemic signs. A thorough analysis of these materials did not reveal convincing evidence of a connection with O.T.O. Another popular theory concerns the British royal family. According to it, some members of the royal house are secret followers of the teachings of Thelema. As evidence, esoteric symbols on royal regalia are cited, which, upon closer inspection, have a completely different origin, dating back to heraldic traditions that existed long before Crowley. More substantiated appears to be the influence of Thelemic philosophy on the formation of certain aspects of libertarian political thought. The principle, "do what thou wilt," in its philosophical understanding, resonates with the ideas of minimal state intervention and personal freedom. Some researchers trace the influence of Crowley's ideas on the formation of countercultural political movements of the 60s, which indirectly affected the subsequent development of civil liberties in Western democracies. It is a documented fact that currently officially registered branches of O.T.O. exist in dozens of countries around the world and operate openly as religious organizations. They publish their materials, hold public events, and participate in public discussions. At the same time, their political influence does not go beyond the usual interaction of religious organizations with authorities. It is important to note that modern O.T.O. distances itself from political activity, focusing on the spiritual aspects of Crowley's teachings. Their official documents emphasize that the organization does not pursue political goals and does not strive for power in the worldly sense of the word. More realistic is the cultural influence of Crowley's ideas on the political sphere through art, literature, and popular culture. Thelemic concepts of individual freedom and self-realization have penetrated public consciousness, shaping certain expectations from political systems and influencing public debates about the boundaries of personal freedom and state control. In an era when digital technologies have permeated all spheres of life, even such traditional organizations as the Ordo Templi Orientis have not been left untouched by the technological revolution. For the O.T.O., the Internet has become not just a new means of communication, but a true magical instrument that has transformed the ways Crowley's teachings are disseminated. The Order's official website, launched in the mid-90s, has turned into a virtual temple where seekers of esoteric knowledge can familiarize themselves with the foundations of Thelemic philosophy without leaving their homes. Digital libraries have made texts accessible that previously could only be found in rare antiquarian bookstores or private collections. Social networks have opened up new opportunities for recruitment. If previously a potential neophyte had to find an active member of the order through a complex system of personal recommendations, now, the first contact often occurs on Facebook, Instagram, or specialized forums. This has allowed the O.T.O to attract a younger generation, raised in the digital age and accustomed to receiving information online. It is noteworthy that even some ritual practices have undergone transformation. During the pandemic, many O.T.O lodges experimented with conducting virtual ceremonies via Zoom and other video conferencing platforms. While full initiations still require physical presence, preparatory classes and theoretical seminars have successfully transitioned to an online format. Smartphone applications have appeared to assist practicing Thelemites in daily rituals and meditations. These programs include meditation timers, digital versions of magical diaries, and even random number generators for divinatory practices. Some members of the order are exploring the possibilities of virtual reality for creating immersive magical spaces. VR projects are being developed that allow the user to virtually visit temples described in Crowley's works, or visualize complex Kabbalistic concepts in three-dimensional space. However, digitalization has brought not only new opportunities, but also challenges. The Order's leadership has faced the problem of preserving the authenticity of the teachings in an era of information overload. The Internet has seen the emergence of many self-proclaimed experts in Thelemic magic, offering simplified or distorted versions of Crowley's practices. This has led to the need for more active educational work by official O.T.O representatives online. Another problem has been security. Traditionally, many aspects of the teachings were transmitted only to initiates of certain degrees. But in the era of digital information leakage, preserving secrets has become almost impossible. The Order has had to revise its approach to secrecy, emphasizing not the concealment of information, but the correct understanding of context and practical experience. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the O.T.O's digital transformation has been the emergence of new interpretations of Crowley's teachings, adapted to the realities of the information society. Some modern Thelemites view the Internet as a material embodiment of what Crowley called the astral plane, a space where thoughts and images can exist independently of a physical medium. In this context, social networks are interpreted as a new form of egregore, a collective energetic entity created by people's thoughts and emotions. In the 21st century, the legacy of Aleister Crowley continues to live on, transforming and adapting to the new realities of a globalized world. The man whom Victorian society considered the embodiment of evil is today seen by many as a visionary who anticipated key trends of modernity. His call to free individual will from social constraints resonates in an era where self-expression has become the highest value. Thelemic philosophy, once accessible only to a select few, is now studied in university classrooms as a significant cultural phenomenon of the 20th century. Leading academic centers from Oxford to Harvard include Crowley's works in their programs on religious studies, psychology, and cultural studies. Academic research into his legacy goes beyond sensationalism, focusing on a deep analysis of his influence on contemporary thought. The Ordo Templi Orientis, having survived periods of decline and revival, today functions as an international organization with branches in 40 countries worldwide. Its members are not only seekers of esoteric knowledge, but also creative professionals, scientists, programmers, people striving for a synthesis of rational and intuitive cognition. The modern O.T.O has adapted its practices to the digital age, using the Internet to disseminate its teachings and virtual technologies to create new forms of ritual experience. Crowley's influence on mass culture remains enormous, though often unrecognized by the general public. His ideas about overcoming the limitations imposed by society on human nature have become part of the general cultural code. From Hollywood blockbusters to computer games, images and concepts stemming from the works of the Great Beast continue to shape the imagination of millions. This influence is particularly noticeable in contemporary music. While in the 70s, thelemic symbolism was primarily used by rock bands, today references to Crowley can be found in hip-hop, electronic music, and even pop hits. Artists like Jay-Z and Rihanna incorporate elements of thelemic iconography into their music videos, often without understanding their historical context, but intuitively sensing their power. Paradoxically, the doctrine once considered radical and subversive is today increasingly perceived as consonant with the dominant values of individualism and self-realization. Corporate personal growth trainings often include elements that echo the self-knowledge practices developed by Crowley. His methods of visualization and affirmation, stripped of their occult context, have become part of mainstream success psychology. Critics of this trend note that the commercialization and simplification of thelemic ideas strip them of their transformative depth. Torn from its context, the principle, "do what thou wilt," easily turns into a justification for consumer egoism, which contradicts Crowley's original intention of seeking true will. Nevertheless, in an era of global crises and uncertainty, some aspects of thelemic philosophy acquire a new resonance. The idea of the advent of a new era, requiring a radical reevaluation of outdated moral systems, resonates with the feeling of many that humanity is on the verge of fundamental changes. Perhaps Aleister Crowley's main legacy is not specific rituals or texts, but the very idea of the possibility of creating a new ethics corresponding to the changed state of the world and consciousness.